So I'm here at the Harrisburg Cemetery. I was trying to get a break in the rain so that I could do a video about some of my ancestors that are buried here, but it won't stop, so I guess I'm going to use my cell phone since that's probably the most waterproof camera that I have. But this cemetery has always fascinated me. This thing was officially chartered in 1845, but the graves go way back before that date. There's a lot of really old graves in here, 18th century graves, but most of those were transferred from other church cemeteries throughout Harrisburg when they ended up building and removing the cemeteries. They just transplanted all the graves here. So this tombstone right here was my 3 times great-grandfather and grandmother, Edwin. Edwin served in the Civil War for a short period. He actually protected Fort Washington across the river here, overlooking the Camelback Bridge when the Confederates were advancing on Harrisburg. He was in a unit what was called an emergency, which is basically kind of like a reserve pulled into action to protect the city. Obviously that never happened because they ended up shifting resources to Gettysburg, and my grandfather ran trains, particularly during the Battle of Antietam. He was running trains from Maryland, bringing soldiers back up here that were injured and taking supplies down to the Union forces out of Harrisburg here. He was an engineer, but him and his wife are buried there. On the other side is Albert Edwin Pancake. You see, it's 1907 to 1921. So Albert is my 2 times great-grandfather's son, so my great-grandmother's brother. We always heard he didn't survive long. Apparently he survived 14 years old. We heard that he drowned. I always assumed that he drowned in the Susquehanna River nearby here, but after doing research I discovered that he was actually in Pennhurst. That place was notorious for abuse to children that were having mental health issues, physically and mentally handicapped.
Learn cooperation and development of emotional response. Many others rock in silence in their stench-filled, overcrowded cottages. Others lie awake in their beds, shackled like prisoners, punished because they cannot control themselves and their illness.
So I found a newspaper article that shows he actually drowned in the Schuylkill River just outside of Pennhurst. So the question is, was he trying to escape that place and end up jumping in that water, try to get away? Because, it was pretty bad. There's actually a documentary about how bad it was back in the 1960s. But it appears that my 2 times great-grandfather Howard, who's buried right here, named his son after his brother Albert. So Albert had an interesting history that I found in the newspapers that I had no idea about. He actually lost his wife and his small child to the 1893 influenza outbreak. 3 years later, he would marry again to what I eventually discovered through newspaper articles was a 14-year-old. He ended up, after about 10 years of marriage and had 2 children to this new wife, he ended up losing her to a cousin, apparently, who was an architect in Harrisburg. So he actually made the papers for suing that cousin for the loss of his wife. And that was a very interesting case, so stay tuned for that story to come. But this cemetery was created during the whole rural cemetery movement, where cemeteries were actually set up as parks for people to visit and picnic for the day. And you can see by the architecture in this place, there's so much interesting grave sites, tombstones, just the way they set the whole thing up. It's a beautiful cemetery. It's starting to really come down now in here, so I'm going to try to get up under some of the shaded areas, and some of the interesting trees that are actually growing here are equally fascinating. Fortunately, a lot of these trees are labeled, Doesn't look like this one is, but it looks old.